I want to open with something that may genuinely challenge the way you have been thinking about aging. For decades, the prevailing medical message delivered to adults past 70 has been a quiet form of surrender. Slow down, accept the changes, manage the decline. And I understand why physicians say it. They are working within systems that reward caution. But the longevity research emerging from institutions like Johns Hopkins, the University of Edinburgh, and Stanford over the past 10 years tells a fundamentally different story. It tells a story of a body that retains a remarkable capacity for resilience well into its 8th and 9th decade, not in spite of age, but in active conversation with it. And the people who access that resilience are not doing anything exotic. They are maintaining a small, specific set of daily behaviors that most of their peers have quietly abandoned. I am Dr. James Mitchell, and in more than 2 decades of clinical practice working with patients between the ages of 70 and 85, I have watched this pattern repeat itself with a consistency that no longer surprises me, but never stops being meaningful. The patients who remain independent, cognitively sharp, physically capable, and genuinely alive to their lives at 80 are not simply the lucky ones. They are the ones who kept doing certain things when the people around them stopped. A landmark study from the Stanford Center on Longevity followed over 4,200 adults between 70 and 90 for 12 years and found that those who maintained 4 or more of the specific daily habits I'm about to describe were 61% less likely to experience what researchers termed accelerated functional decline, the rapid loss of independence that places seniors in assisted living years before it is medically necessary. 61%. That is not a marginal statistical finding. That is the difference between living your remaining decades on your own terms and living them on someone else's schedule. I'm going to count down 6 of these habits today, from number 6 to number 1. And I want to ask you to stay with me until the end, because the number 1 habit on this list is the one that fewer than 12% of adults over 75 maintain consistently. It has nothing to do with diet or conventional exercise. Researchers at Johns Hopkins have described it as the most underutilized longevity intervention available to aging adults without a prescription. I will tell you what it is, why it works at a neurological level, and exactly how to begin it. But first, I want to ask you something directly. Leave your age in the comments below and tell me which of these 6 habits you believe you already have. I read every comment on this channel because this community is not background noise to me. It is the entire point. Let us begin at number 6. Strategic hydration is the first habit, and I want to reframe what you think you know about drinking water, because after the age of 70, hydration is not the simple matter it was at 45. 3 specific physiological changes alter everything. First, kidney filtering efficiency declines by approximately 40% after 70, which means your body's ability to manage fluid balance becomes significantly less precise. Second, the thirst mechanism becomes genuinely blunted. You stop feeling thirsty at the level of dehydration that would have sent a clear signal to your body 20 years ago. This means you can be meaningfully dehydrated and feel almost nothing that tells you so. Third, your blood's capacity to transport oxygen and nutrients to the brain and muscles diminishes with every percentage point of lost fluid. The consequences of chronic mild dehydration in this age group are not subtle. Research from the European Journal of Nutrition involving 3,500 adults over 70 found that those who maintained consistent daily hydration above 1.8 liters showed a 38% lower rate of urinary tract infections, a 29% reduction in falls, and significantly better performance on short-term memory assessments. That fall reduction figure deserves emphasis. Dehydration measurably impairs both balance and reaction time, and in an adult over 70, those are precisely the capacities that determine whether a misstep becomes a recovery or a hospitalization. The brain is approximately 75% water. A 2% reduction in hydration produces measurable cognitive impairment at any age, but after 75, this effect is amplified because the brain's compensatory mechanisms are already working at a higher baseline demand just to maintain normal function. The practical application is specific. Drink 12 to 16 ounces of water immediately upon waking, before coffee, before breakfast, before anything else. The overnight fluid deficit in adults over 75 is typically 30% higher than it was in midlife, because the body continues losing fluid through breathing and mild perspiration during sleep, while the kidney's conservation mechanisms become less efficient. Then drink a moderate amount with each meal and once in the mid-afternoon. The refinement that separates strategic hydration from casual drinking is this. After 75, the kidneys have increasing difficulty retaining sodium, and without adequate sodium, plain water passes through the system without being fully absorbed at the cellular level where it is actually needed. A small amount of high-quality electrolyte, a pinch of sea salt, or a balanced electrolyte tablet in your morning water dramatically improves cellular absorption. One of my patients, a woman of 81 who came to me describing afternoon cognitive fog, dizziness upon standing, and what she called a cotton-wrapped feeling in her thinking, was not dramatically dehydrated in any clinical sense. She was chronically and mildly underhydrated. We made one targeted change, strategic morning hydration with a small electrolyte addition. 6 weeks later, she described it as someone having cleaned the windows of her mind. Balance improved. Afternoon fatigue decreased substantially. One habit, one meaningful change in the quality of daily life. Number 5 is resistance-based movement, and I need to be precise about what this means, because the term is consistently misunderstood in this population. I am not describing gym memberships or heavy weights. I am describing any movement that requires your muscles to work against a force. A resistance band, a wall push-up, a set of bodyweight sit-to-stands, carrying bags of groceries with deliberate muscular engagement. The clinical reason this matters after 75 relates to a process called anabolic resistance, which is the progressively reduced ability of aging muscle cells to respond to the stimulus of protein and exercise. In practical terms, your muscles after 75 require a stronger, more intentional signal to maintain the same mass that a 50-year-old would preserve with half the effort. They are not failing. They are simply harder to reach. And when you stop reaching them, sarcopenia begins. Sarcopenia is the progressive loss of muscle mass and strength associated with aging, and research from the Mayo Clinic connects it to a 47% increased risk of falls, a 53% higher likelihood of losing the ability to perform basic daily tasks within 5 years, and a significantly shortened overall lifespan. A study from Tufts University followed adults between 75 and 85 who began twice-weekly resistance training. After just 10 weeks, participants showed an average 37% increase in leg strength, a 28% improvement in balance scores, and a measurable improvement in insulin sensitivity, which directly influences energy levels, systemic inflammation, and cognitive function. The mitochondria in your muscle cells, the microscopic power plants that generate cellular energy throughout the body, regenerate more efficiently when resistance exercise is consistently present. You are not simply building muscle. You are rebuilding the energy infrastructure of your entire physiology. The prescription is 2 to 3 sessions per week, 20 to 30 minutes each, focusing on the large muscle groups of the legs, hips, and back. Resistance bands are ideal because they provide progressive load without joint impact. The timing refinement that matters most after 75 is this. Perform your resistance session within 30 minutes of consuming 25 to 30 grams of protein. The anabolic window, the period during which muscle tissue can most efficiently absorb protein for repair and rebuilding, is shorter and less forgiving after 75 than at any earlier point in life. Timing is not a detail at this age. It is a clinical variable. Number 4 is maintaining a consistent and purposeful sleep schedule, and this goes considerably deeper than simply going to bed at a reasonable hour. After 75, your circadian rhythm, the body's internal 24-hour biological clock, begins to weaken structurally. Melatonin production falls to roughly 30% of what it was at age 30. Slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most physically restorative phase of the sleep cycle, decreases by up to 80% from its levels in early adulthood. This is the phase during which human growth hormone is secreted, the hormone that governs cellular repair, immune maintenance, and muscle preservation overnight. And the neurological consequences of disrupted sleep after 70 extend far beyond fatigue. Research from the University of California, Berkeley, found that adults over 70 with fragmented or inconsistent sleep patterns showed a 68% higher accumulation of amyloid plaques in the brain, the same plaques centrally implicated in Alzheimer's disease. Poor sleep in this age group is not a comfort issue, it is a neuroprotective issue. The seniors who do this most effectively do not simply sleep more. They sleep with precision and consistency. They go to bed within the same 30-minute window every single night. They wake at the same time every morning, including weekends, because the circadian system is calibrated by regularity and destabilized by variation. They maintain bedroom temperature between 65 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit because body temperature regulation during sleep becomes less efficient after 75, and a cooler environment actively supports the deep sleep phases the aging brain requires. They avoid screens for 60 minutes before sleep, not solely because of blue light, but because mental engagement from screens keeps the prefrontal cortex in an active state that delays sleep onset by an average of 47 minutes in adults over 70, according to research from Harvard Medical School. The refinement I recommend pairing with this is 10 minutes of slow diaphragmatic breathing immediately before sleep. Breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 2, exhaling for 6. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, and research demonstrates it reduces nighttime cortisol levels by up to 22%, making it substantially easier for the aging brain to achieve and sustain the slow-wave sleep that governs physical repair and cognitive consolidation. Number 3 is deliberate and distributed protein intake, and this is the nutritional misconception I encounter most frequently in my practice, and the one that concerns me most because its consequences are insidious and cumulative. The idea that older adults need less protein is not simply incorrect, it is physiologically backwards. After 75, due to the anabolic resistance I described earlier, the body actually requires 50 to 75% more dietary protein per unit of body weight than a healthy 30-year-old needs to achieve the same muscle maintenance effect. Yet the majority of seniors I see in clinical practice are consuming roughly half the protein their physiology requires, often because appetite diminishes with age and carbohydrate. Dense foods feel easier to prepare and consume. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition involving over 2,700 adults between 70 and 85 found that those who consumed at least 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight daily, distributed across 3 or more meals, maintained significantly greater muscle mass, demonstrated 41% lower rates of hospitalization from fall-related injuries, and showed markedly stronger immune responses to common infections, including influenza and pneumonia. Think of dietary protein as the structural raw material your body uses for overnight reconstruction. Every night during sleep, damaged and aged tissue is broken down and rebuilt. Without sufficient protein, that reconstruction is incomplete. Over months and years, the structural deficit compounds, and what presents clinically as normal aging is frequently the consequence of a chronic and correctable nutritional deficiency. The practical approach is to target 25 to 35 grams of protein at each of your 3 main meals. This corresponds to approximately 4 to 5 ounces of chicken, fish, eggs, Greek yogurt, or legumes per meal. The reason distribution across meals matters as much as total daily intake is that aging muscle tissue can effectively utilize only approximately 35 to 40 grams of protein per meal for actual synthesis. Beyond that threshold, the excess is oxidized for energy rather than used for repair. Distributing intake across the day ensures that every gram you consume is working as efficiently as possible. One of my patients, a 78-year-old man whose previous physician had attributed 18 pounds of weight loss to normal aging, was in reality losing lean muscle mass at a clinically significant rate. His grip strength, which is one of the most reliable predictors of longevity in older adults, had fallen to the 15th percentile for his age group. We restructured his daily meals around deliberate protein targets. 12 weeks later, he had regained 11 pounds of lean mass. His grip strength had returned to the 60th percentile, and he told me with unmistakable pride that he had carried his own groceries from the car without stopping for the first time in 2 years. The refinement here is to pair your protein meals with a small amount of vitamin C, an orange, sliced bell pepper, a squeeze of lemon over fish. Vitamin C is a necessary cofactor in collagen synthesis, which works in direct concert with dietary protein to maintain not just muscle tissue, but the connective tissue, joint cartilage, and structural integrity that collectively determine how well the body holds itself together after 75. Number 2 is daily intentional social engagement, and I anticipate that some of you will instinctively categorize this as a psychological or emotional recommendation rather than a medical one. I want to address that instinct directly. The research on social engagement and longevity in adults over 75 is not soft science. It is among the most robustly replicated findings in modern gerontology. A meta-analysis from Brigham Young University, drawing on data from over 300,000 adults across multiple decades, found that chronic social isolation carried a mortality risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day. That equivalency is not rhetorical. It is a measured statistical finding. The National Institute on Aging has documented that chronic loneliness accelerates cognitive decline by up to 64%. Increases dementia risk by 41%, and produces sustained elevations in inflammatory markers, including interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein that directly damage cardiovascular tissue, immune function, and neural connectivity over time. Here is the mechanism at a physiological level. Genuine engaged human interaction triggers the release of oxytocin, which suppresses cortisol, reduces systemic inflammation, and activates the prefrontal cortex in ways that maintain the density and activity of neural pathways governing memory, decision-making, and emotional regulation. When those pathways go unused for extended periods, they begin to prune. After 75, when neuroplasticity has already declined significantly, restoring pruned pathways is far more difficult than maintaining them through consistent use. Your social brain is a muscle in the most neurologically literal sense. The neurons that fire during real conversation, shared laughter, genuine disagreement, and emotional connection are the same neurons that preserve your memory and cognitive identity. The prescription is at minimum one meaningfully engaged social interaction every single day. In person is optimal. A genuinely engaged phone call is valuable. What does not provide the neurological stimulus is passive social presence, sitting in the same room as someone while both of you watch television. Active engagement is the requirement. Thinking, responding, laughing, debating, sharing. That activation is the biological event that matters. One of my most memorable patients was an 83-year-old woman who had lost her husband of 54 years and withdrawn from social life almost entirely in the months that followed. When her daughter brought her to see me, her cognitive assessments had declined measurably in under a year. We did not change her medications. We built her a social schedule, a weekly book discussion group, a daily rotating phone call with family and friends, a twice-weekly volunteer shift at her local library. 8 months later, her cognitive scores had returned to near baseline. Her inflammatory markers had decreased. Her daughter told me she seemed like herself again. Social engagement at this age is not an optional quality of life consideration. It is a biological necessity with measurable and clinically significant consequences when absent. The refinement is to combine social engagement with physical movement whenever the opportunity exists. A walk with a friend, a gentle group exercise class, gardening alongside a neighbor. Research from the University of British Columbia shows that combining social interaction with even light physical activity produces a synergistic elevation in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, that substantially exceeds what either behavior produces independently. BDNF is the primary growth factor for neuronal survival and the formation of new neural connections. It is, in the most accurate sense, biological fertilizer for your brain. And now, we arrive at number 1. The habit that Johns Hopkins researchers have described as the most underutilized longevity intervention available to aging adults without a prescription. The habit that fewer than 12% of adults over 75 maintain with any consistency. Daily purposeful cognitive challenge. I need to be precise about what this means, because crossword puzzles and passive reading, while not without value, are not what the research is pointing to. I am describing the deliberate daily practice of learning something genuinely new. A skill your brain has never attempted before. A language, a musical instrument, a form of creative expression, a craft that requires sequential learning, sustained attention, and the tolerance of productive difficulty. The neurological rationale for why this rises above everything else on this list begins with a concept called cognitive reserve. Cognitive reserve is the brain's resilience buffer, its capacity to absorb age-related structural changes and continue functioning at a high level despite them. Think of it as excess computational capacity. The greater your cognitive reserve, the more neurological damage can accumulate before functional decline becomes apparent. And the single most powerful way to build and maintain cognitive reserve after 75 is novel learning that consistently pushes the brain beyond the familiar. After 75, the brain develops a strong preference for established neural pathways. It becomes extraordinarily efficient at familiar tasks and increasingly reluctant to construct new ones. This is a metabolic conservation strategy, not a character limitation, but it is also the mechanism by which cognitive reserve is quietly depleted when it goes unchallenged. Research from the University of Edinburgh's Lothian birth cohort study, which followed over 1,000 adults from their 70s into their late 80s, found that those who engaged in novel and challenging cognitive activities for at least 30 minutes daily showed a 47% slower rate of brain atrophy on MRI imaging, maintained significantly better processing speed and episodic memory, and were 38% less likely to receive a dementia diagnosis over the following decade. A separate study from the Rush Memory and Aging Project found that seniors who described their daily lives as intellectually engaging demonstrated brain function equivalent to adults 10 years younger on standardized neurological assessments. The mechanism is neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. While neuroplasticity declines with age, it never disappears entirely. The brain retains meaningful structural plasticity well into the 80s, but only when it receives sufficient stimulus. Novel learning is that stimulus. Learning a new language activates 5 distinct cortical regions simultaneously and has been shown to delay dementia onset by an average of 4.5 years. Learning a musical instrument engages fine motor control, auditory processing, working memory, and emotional regulation in a coordinated neurological demand that no other activity fully replicates. Even learning to prepare an unfamiliar cuisine from scratch, because it requires reading comprehension, sequential planning, sensory discrimination, and precise motor execution, constitutes meaningful cognitive challenge. The practical approach is to select one genuinely new skill every 3 to 4 months and invest 20 to 30 minutes per day in active learning. The word active is the operative one. Watching someone else perform a skill on a screen is not learning it. Sitting with the instrument, the canvas, the language workbook, the recipe in front of you, and working through the difficulty, that productive struggle is where the neurological benefit lives. It is the cognitive equivalent of the resistance training I described at number 5. The resistance is not an obstacle to the benefit. The resistance is the benefit. One of my patients, A 79-year-old retired engineer who had spent the first 3 years of his retirement in comfortable but unchallenging routine came to me noting difficulty recalling names and following complex conversations. His imaging showed age-appropriate changes, but his cognitive reserve scores were lower than his baseline neurological health warranted. My prescription was not pharmacological. It was one instruction. Choose something he had genuinely always wanted to learn and do it every day. He chose oil painting. He was, by his own candid admission, extraordinarily bad at it initially. 18 months later, he had completed 23 paintings, joined a local art group which addressed number 2 on this list simultaneously, and his follow-up cognitive assessments showed measurable improvement in 3 of 5 evaluated domains. Improvement. Not stabilization. Measurable improvement at 79 years old. The refinement that amplifies this practice is to pair daily cognitive challenge with adequate DHA intake. DHA is the primary structural fatty acid of neuronal cell membranes and is found in meaningful concentrations in fatty fish such as salmon, mackerel, and sardines, as well as in high-quality fish oil supplements. Research from the Framingham Heart Study demonstrates that adults with higher circulating DHA levels show significantly greater neuroplasticity responses to cognitive training. DHA does not replace the learning. It optimizes the brain's capacity to consolidate and benefit from it. It is the biological substrate upon which the neurological work of novel learning is built. Before I close, I want to offer a safety note for anyone who is managing joint conditions, cardiovascular concerns, or significant physical deconditioning. The habits I have described today span a wide range of physical and cognitive demand, and your individual clinical situation matters. Please consult your physician before making significant changes to your activity level or nutritional intake, particularly if you are managing chronic conditions or take medications that may be affected by dietary changes. Everything I have shared today is intended as medically grounded guidance, not as a replacement for the individualized care of your own physician who knows your complete history. Here is what I want to leave you with. The patients who have taught me the most about aging well did not do so by fighting age. They did so by understanding what age requires and providing it with intention every single day. Strategic hydration, because the physiology of fluid balance changes after 70 and demands a deliberate response. Resistance movement twice weekly, because muscle does not maintain itself after 75 without a specific and consistent signal. Consistent sleep architecture, because the brain's overnight repair systems are both essential and fragile at this stage. Distributed protein intake, because the raw material of physical reconstruction must be present in the right amounts at the right times. Daily social engagement, because the neurons that preserve your cognitive identity require the stimulus of genuine human connection to remain structurally intact. And purposeful novel learning every single day, because neuroplasticity is not lost after 75. It is simply waiting to be demanded. Here is my challenge to you. Identify the one habit on this list that you feel most absent from your current daily life and commit to beginning it tomorrow. Not next week. Tomorrow. Mark the date. Practice it for 7 consecutive days. And then come back to this video and leave me a comment. Tell me your age, where you are watching from, and what you noticed across those 7 days. Which day felt different? Which task became slightly easier? Your account of that experience is not simply feedback for me. It is clinical evidence for every other person in this community who is sitting on the edge of beginning and needs to hear from someone who took the first step. If this video has given you something of genuine value today, please share it with someone in your life who is navigating these years and deserves access to this information. Subscribe to this channel for weekly medically grounded guidance made specifically for adults over 60. And know this with certainty. It is never too late to begin. The body and mind you have right now, at whatever age you are watching this, retain more capacity for positive change than you have likely been told. I have seen it, I have measured it, and I look forward to hearing about it from you. I will see you in the next one.